Hi everyone, thanks for being on today for the next edition of our LED Wizard 8 Wednesday Wizardry. As always, if you guys have questions throughout our time, please shoot those over through the questions tab and we will be sure that we get those answered. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff.
All right, Lauren, thank you very much. Let me just get the slideshow set up here. Welcome, everyone. Thanks, as always, for joining. Today we have a great topic in power supply loading, and this is interesting in the sense that there are a lot of options in LED Wizard for power supply loading, and there are a lot of different ways that shops will look at this particular topic. Different ways that they like to do it. So there's a lot of flexibility in the software, and we'll go through a number of different options and different approaches. Go through the PowerPoint and then get into the software and show some different options. So I hope everybody's doing well. I know that some shops are getting back to work, getting back in the shop, and that's great news. So hopefully everybody's doing well and staying healthy. So here's the agenda, and as always, I'll also mention that if you have questions, put them through in the chat, and Lauren will interrupt me, and I'll answer them. We have an hour; it should be plenty of time to get through everything today. So I'll do a couple of quick introductions on the topic of power supplies, including the different loading modes that we have, and then a variety of loading options. We'll talk about load balancing and fine tuning, making some adjustments to the power supply loading that comes out from one of the options. We'll talk about display and export options, and there are just some little things in the software that I want to point out that are related to power supplies. And also, as always, I go through this slide to mention what we're not talking about today. Today's pretty specific on power supplies. So this is the list of previous topics that we've already done, and there are recordings of each of these past topics. If you haven't been on these and you want to access them, then I believe that Lauren will follow up with an email that has links to all these. So you just have to sign up, and then you'll have immediate access to the recording. For now, our final topic, and we may add some more, but our final topic for this series looks like it's going to be next week: vectorizing, on-screen digitizing, and freehand drawing. And this is I think also a good topic in the sense that it will cover how to handle non-vector artwork, like photographs like this one, which in the grand scheme of things is a pretty good photograph of a retrofit. But what we'll talk about how to handle poor artwork and how to create vector drawings, or if you even need to create a vector drawing at all. So this kind of goes a little bit with the data import and cleanup webinar that we did. That was focused on vector files, and this one is focused on bitmap files. Okay, so real quick on just a little introduction to the topic of power supply loading. Obviously, power supplies are a critical part of the layout. They're a critical part of the estimate. You need the module, the power supply count as part of your estimate. The positioning of the power supplies may be critical to the layout, right? Where is the power access? Where do these sit? Are they above the letters, below the letters, inside of the letters? Are they remote from a cabinet, something like that? Load and load balancing, load percentage and load balancing is something that needs to be considered. And again, there are a lot of different thoughts and approaches to this topic. Was an appropriate load? What kind of margin, as we call it, do we need? Do I want to reload and rebalance? Is that necessary? So we'll talk about that. Also, wiring wiring diagrams for production and for UL as well. Some shops are very specific in taking our wiring diagrams, and that's exactly how they're wired in the shop. Other times that's left to to the shop or to the installers. But UL loves to see wiring diagrams, right? They love to see the layout, what drivers, where they're positioned. They might like to see a cutoff switch and other things related to wiring diagrams. So that's something that that's valuable as well. And then power supply loading preferences, I think vary widely. As I said, margin values or percentages. I kind of grew up in this part of the business thinking that power supply should be loaded 80%, and I think that's early on. That's kind of how it was. Our principal LED power supplies load now to 100%, right? And we have smart packaging, and I'll talk about that. So that's kind of changed. I mean, the margin, if you will, is smaller or gone at this point. Whether or not to split letters. If you have a set of channel letters, do you want to have one letter that's split between two drivers? Do you want to have those be self-contained? What are you comfortable with? Is it a big deal for you to have more drivers? Do you want the absolute minimum? So these are also questions. So anyway, so we'll talk about some of these things, and I think initially in thinking about this topic, in my experience, there's a really wide range of thoughts and experience on this topic. So we've tried to make the software as flexible as possible to handle all those different approaches. I also typically show this slide, and in the context of power supplies, I just wanted to bring this up because the Easy Layout Builder does have a few power supply loading options. We have what's called simple optimal, which will just load a power supply to 100% and then add the next power supply. We have optimal by letter, which is similar to LED Wizard 8, which won't break letters. And then we have optimal by run, which sort of the level of granularity of loading is a run of LEDs. So that's similar. The main difference really is that there's no fine tuning of power supply loading in Easy Layout Builder. There's also no visual representation of the drivers and where they go, and you don't get that in Easy Layout, but you get a number. You get it says there's 3 drivers, and this is you do see the load percentage. This is the driver, the part number, the watts, and all that. So that's a difference. LED Wizard 8 shows the wire diagram. You can position them. You can put them inside the letters if it's self-contained, this sort of thing. Okay, so again, that's if you haven't been on Easy Layout Builder, certainly go check that out on the PLED website. Okay, so if there are any questions at this point, I'll get into power supply modes, and there are 3 essential modes for loading power supplies, and the first one is auto or automatic, and really in most cases, I think this is where you should start. It's fast, it's easy to do. If you don't like the results, you can undo or delete and start over. But there are several different options that are under the category of auto loading that I'll talk about on the next slide. But essentially, here there's really 2 ways. I mean, you can use the power flow tab options to preset how you want to load your power supplies before you even do the population. Okay, and that's the checkbox auto loading, or auto power supply loading, and that will you'll select the driver that you want to use from the list that's shown here on the right, and then you select the option that you want to do. Is it optimal by letter? Is it self-contained? And I'll talk about that in a second. So you select that, and then it just does it and loads it as part of the population. That's the most automatic way. Or you could make the population, and then you can select letter by letter or group or line by line, and then you can load the selected objects. And then so that's also, that's sort of pseudo-automated, I guess. You'd have some manual control over what it is that you have selected and how you're loading it. And then there's manual loading, and this is kind of, I guess, the other extreme. And this is where you actually, in the power supply tab, the PS tab, you select the driver you want, you click on this plus button, and then you drag that driver into the screen. You put it where you want, and then you go to the letter, and then you load that driver letter by letter or run by run. Okay, and so that's the manual way. And that's actually how it started in LED Wizard. That was the original power supply loading, was a manual process like that until we automated. So this really has the most precise control. So again, if you have a more complicated job, or you're just not quite sure how you want to do it, and you just want to build it up driver by driver, then manual loading is the way to go. And it's pretty fast, except for really complicated layouts. You can get through that pretty quickly. Now there's another option called power supply mode, and I'm not really going to focus on this too much because I don't think it's used a whole lot. But essentially, if you have a really big cabinet or a really big letter, then you can use power supply mode to make a selection of modules that are not based on the run. Okay, so if you imagine a big letter that has sort of concentric inlines and a whole bunch of runs that span and go around the outside of the letter, maybe it makes more sense to just draw a box around a section and say these modules are going to go on this driver, and you're thinking about positioning of the driver relative to where the modules are. So that's power supply mode. Maybe take a big cabinet and you divide it into four sections, right? That's power supply mode. So we'll talk about that as well. So different loading options. So we have the modes, and then we have the options. Okay, and options being in this list here. So I'll go through these, and some of these are new. Some of them were in LED Wizard 7 as well. But the first one is one per letter, and these would be the term self-contained. So you want one per letter, and maybe the load percentage varies by letter. So this isn't necessarily the mode to use when you want to run the drivers as full as you can. One per letter, self-contained. We'll talk about how to position the drivers inside of the letter if you want to show it that way. One per letter auto select of the power supply. So the original one per letter, the first option, will use the same driver across all the letters, which in a lot of cases is fine. In some cases, if your object or your letter set varies a lot, then you might be better to use auto select power supply. And I have an example that I'll show you where maybe one letter is a 60 watt, one letter is a 120 watt, and one letter is a 40 watt. So that's auto select. It'll pick the appropriate driver based on the wattage of that letter. And then there's one for all letters. So if you have a small letter set or something that a graphic or a cabinet or something that's just not very big, and you say, look, I can get everything on one driver, then that's the option to use. Auto select in the along the same lines, it will choose the best module. I'm sorry, the best driver to fit. So one for all letters is, I mean, it's fairly common on smaller types of layouts, and that's that's a pretty easy option. Optimal by letter really, I think, is the most common for a channel letter set. Optimal by letter will load, it'll keep letters together, right? So it won't split a letter between two different drivers. So it'll start on the left, it'll go across the letter set. Hey, I can load the first three letters on this driver. Can I load the fourth? No, I can't load the fourth, that would overload. Let's put another driver in. Okay, I can get the next two letters et cetera, et cetera. So that's optimal by letter, which a lot of times for channel letter sets it's normally what I would use as a starting point for a channel letter set. If it wasn't self-contained, then optimal by letter. Now, optimal by run is a additional level of granularity where an individual run is the unit that's loaded. So optimal by run, you could have a case where within a single letter you have 2 drivers on it. Okay, so maybe if you have a letter T, the top of the T could be on the first driver, and the vertical part of the T could be on a second driver, for example. So that's optimal by run. And you can break runs to better utilize optimal by run. Okay, so you can say, hey, I want to break the run here because that's going to give me better power supply loading. And so again, this is completely up to you. In some cases, if it's a difference between 2 drivers and 3 drivers, maybe you do it. If it's a difference between 15 drivers and 16 drivers, I don't know. There's a balance here of complexity, of thoughts for how this is going to be installed and things like this. So I tend to err on the side of let's make it easy. Let's make it visually so that everybody can understand it. I don't have to run every power supply at 100%, but again, that's completely up to you as the user. So finally, optimal by module is a mode where you actually will load a driver all the way to 100% and then break the run at that point. And this is automatic. Break the run at that point, load up the next driver all the way to 100% or to the margin, break the run at that point, et cetera, et cetera. So this is probably would give you the fewest number of drivers in a given job. And really, depending on the job, you may end up with the last driver is not fully loaded. Maybe it's close, maybe it's not, but this is really the level of granularity is to the individual module using this option. Okay, so that's and I think this for the most part covers what you need to do. And if one of these options doesn't fit your design, then do it manually and do it that way, and that gives you the most control. But these are generally the options. Normally, one of these is a good a good place to start. Okay, so I'm going to talk now about just some kind of details and some options, and we'll get into the software here in a minute, and I'll go through this stuff. So the first thing is rotation and the position of the label relative to the power supply. And again, in reference to the prior version of LED Wizard, you couldn't do either one of these things. It was just the driver was horizontal and the text was below it. But now you can rotate the driver so that it can be fit inside a letter like this, and you can adjust the position of the data label that goes with it to be above or below or right or left. And so in this case, I have the label to the right of the power supply, and I've kind of rotated the power supply. So this little box, these 2 rectangular boxes, that's the actual physical size of the module of the driver. Okay, so if it's something self-contained like this and you want to put it in there, that's the actual size. Okay, and that data label, you can customize the data that's on there. You can customize what that label looks like. Okay, so that's this is a new capability. It's great for self-contained letters, cabinets where you want to put it inside. Gives you good flexibility as far as what that looks like. The next topic, changing a driver, and we made this easier in the current version. So let's say that you do a layout and you don't like the driver that you selected, it's overloaded or it's underloaded, and you want to change it. So it's easy to do that. You just in the power supply tab over here, you pick the driver that you want to switch to, the one that you want to use, and then you go back to the layout and you double click on the driver that you want to change, and then this little dialog box comes up and says, hey, do you want to change it to this universal 120? You say yes, it changes it, it recalculates the load, and off you go. So it's pretty easy. And I just mentioned here, you could just delete it and reload it, and that's fine too. Either way we'll get you there. So I think it's pretty common, certainly on a bigger job, to maybe you have a preference for, I want to use all 60 watts. Maybe that doesn't fit the job. Maybe bigger job, you want to do 120s, or it's a smaller job. We have a 40 and a 20, I think, a 20 and a 40. Small drivers for small jobs. Okay, so margin or buffer. I've mentioned that that we load to 100%, but this concept of margin or buffer is a percentage or a number of watts that that you want to reserve and keep that unloaded. So again, it used to be 20%, and then it felt like for a while it was 10%, and then maybe 5%, and now nothing in some cases. So again, with Principal, we have smart packaging. So when you order from us, you get your LEDs and your driver together in a bag, and you know that that string of LEDs will fit on that driver. Okay. Now, if despite this, let's say that there's an ordinance or there's some requirement of the job, or a certain customer who says, you know what, I'm not comfortable. I want to load up to only to 90% or to 80%. In that case, you can go to the job tab and you can set a custom power supply margin, and you can put a percentage here. So if you do that prior to loading, it's going to use this value instead of essentially 0. And it would use that value when it loads. So this is, this is a job by job value. So you would actually put this value in, prior to loading, and it would just be for that file. It's not across every job. And then finally here, the overloaded drivers are highlighted where the text is red. And I'll talk about colored power supplies here, I think next. But this, if the label is red, that means that it's overloaded, and that's a warning to look at that and change it. Okay, so so you want to watch out for that. It's just a visual thing. Hey, that label is red. Okay, so here's power supply color mode. And this is also new in LED Wizard 8. And we found that on more complicated jobs, it can be very difficult at times to know what driver is driving which string of modules, and it can get very, very complicated. So the color mode, and granted, this isn't a hard example, but I still think a good one. It shows that we've got essentially 3 runs here, and this is like a very large shallow cabinet. And granted, I put more modules in here just to show what this what this can look like. But so so we've got each driver driving 3 of these rows, and I think these are 85% or something like that. So we have, I don't know, I think 16 or 20 colors or something, unique colors. So it highlights the wire and the drawing of the power supply to that color, and this can be very helpful. And this is actually just a switch. It's a toggle in the software. You can turn this on and off. If it's helpful, turn it on. If it's not, turn it off. I mean, we certainly don't want to confuse customers to think, wait a minute, did I just buy 16 different colors of LEDs? So we don't want to create that kind of impression, but it's really more for making sure that you keep track of what's where, and also to make sure that everything's in fact loaded. You know, if you don't see any color in this mode, then those would be unloaded modules. And in this mode, wires that don't reach are shown as dotted lines. Previously, wires that didn't reach in LED Wizard were always shown as a red wire, and so we kind of changed that with this because red is the first color, so your first power supply will be red. So a dotted line now shows that it's not going to reach. Okay, so real quick here now on load balancing. And load balancing is just the concept here that you know, you don't want one module at 98% and one at 32%, right? If you can balance those so they're both whatever, you know, 60%, you know, that feels like a good idea. This, you know, load balancing on something like this is not automatic in the software. Okay, you have to look and you have to say, okay, I want to you know, move this one letter from one driver to another, or I want to break the run and load, you know, half of the letter on this one if you want to load balance. Again, this is another, you know, I'd say personal preference. Very much depends on the job, I think. But I'll show you how to do this when we get into the software. It's easy to you know, unload and reload. It happens in one step. You know, if I take this letter and put it over here, it takes off this one and puts it on this one. Changes the color. It's pretty easy. I did want to point out and remind everybody that our modules are mid-loaded. So we have on our title block template, we have a max, you know, max per series value on the title block. So most of the time that's half of the maximum load. So if we can load 50 modules on a 60-watt driver, the max per series would be 25, and so you'd load it in the middle, 25 one way and 25 the other way. And you can, you know, visually you can show this. You can put the driver in the middle of the run. You can break the run and have the two wires come down. You know, if you want to go to that level of detail. Okay. We're getting close to getting into the software. Just a couple more things. So there are various display options here in the options menu. You can see you can toggle the power supply wires on and off. You know, I like to show them unless it's very clear. You know, what drivers with what letters or what objects. Sometimes on a more complicated layout, the power supply wires feel like they're everywhere. It can make the layout look a little bit more complex or messy. So I can see in some cases turning those off. You know, sometimes within Principal, we might show what drivers are on what modules by drawing a box. If that's appropriate for the layout, if that's cleaner, that's an option. I mean, most of the time we have power supply wires on, but there are other ways to do it. There's the power supply data box. You know, that's the little label that shows the load and the name and all that, and that's you can turn that on or off as well as the box around it. And then you know, power supply color mode. Again, you can toggle that on and off to see what that looks like. Wire type, so that most of the time we have the wires that are straight lines and right angles. There's another wire type mode, if you will, where the wires are they're like arcs, you know, Bezier curves. They're rounded, curved, and to me that is less clear about what's going where. But that is an option if you prefer the way that looks. And then uniform size and positioning, and by this there's an option to make the data label all the same size on a power supply. It looks a little bit cleaner. I like to position power supplies on a guideline, so you can drag a guideline in so that they're all kind of on the same plane. Having them the same size on the same plane looks a lot cleaner as opposed to having them everywhere, you know, different sizes and this sort of thing. So that's just kind of a display thing. In terms of exporting, power supplies are a layer. The power supply wires are a layer. So again, you can selectively turn these on and off when you export, and that's in the export dialog box under layers to export. So again, There are some cases where you'd want to turn the power supply wire off when you export. And just remember that how you have it displayed in the layout and how you export it are separate things. Okay, so just because you have it turned off in the layout doesn't mean it's also turned off when you export. That's a separate operation to determine what layers you want when you export. Okay, a couple of thoughts just before I get into the software here. Again, everybody does this differently. So the software needs to be very flexible. Use common sense. It's easy to make a mistake if you pick the wrong module or pick the wrong driver for something. So use some common sense about how this should look and how it should be loaded, and utilize the drawings for UL. Take advantage of the fact that we're creating drawings that show wires, that show drivers, and save those for your UL person. Okay, so let me switch now. I'll take a break, Lauren. Are there any questions?
No questions.
Okay. All right. So I made a couple of files that I thought that we could start with, just in the interest of time here. So this is a layout that I made, obviously of 3 very different sized letters, and what I wanted to show here is the auto select options. So before I do that, there's just a couple of areas that I want to point out. So the power flow tab, from the picture before, this is the drop down list of the different options for loading, and these are I'll go through these. And then down here, this is the power supply tab, and this is where you actually select which driver that you want to use, except for the auto mode, which auto selects. But this is normally where if you were doing a layout and you wanted to set up the loading, prior to the layout, you do auto PS on a 60 watt, then it would use a 60 watt. Okay, so that's, these, excuse me, these are the primary ways really to access the power supply loading options. But there's also the power supply menu, the PS menu. And this is another way that you can access some of the options, including some shortcut keys, and we'll use these when we show manual loading. That's mainly where you'll find the options: the PS menu, and then the power flow tab, and the PS tab down here. So the first thing that I want to do on this layout is I want to just show what 1 per letter. So let's do 1 per letter, and I'll select the 60 watt. And you'll notice that this one only loads to 20%. Okay, and notice that that I can move the power supply around. I can position the power supply wherever I want to. At every point where there's a break in the run, it's wired from one end. Okay. So and then this letter, 3 different runs all connected here, 45%. So again, you can customize what this label looks like. The main standard is the load percentage, the module count, the watts used out of the total, and the name of the power supply. Okay, and then this letter is overloaded. Okay, and it shows that in red. I tried to put 78 watts on a 60 watt driver, and it overloads. Now it does it because I told it to, but clearly this is not what we want. Okay, so I'm going to delete these, and I'm in the layout tool, and I just clicked on them and deleted them. So instead, I'm going to do 1 per letter auto select. And now I get, on this little guy, I get the 20 watt, 12 watts out of 20. Here I get the 40 watt. Then here I get the 120. Okay, so that's auto select of the driver, and this is great. I mean, if you don't, if you know you want 1 per letter, you're not sure what's going to fit, use the auto mode, and and it'll go ahead and do it for you. I know a lot of you probably just say, hey, I only use 60-watt drivers, in which case, maybe this is a moot point. If you're using a 60-watt driver, that means that on this letter that we would have to break the run, and we'd load one run on one driver and one run on another driver. Okay, and so we'll get to that here in a second. So, so obviously, one for all letters. I mean, that's pretty easy. If I had a bunch of these little A's or something, one driver for the whole set, that's pretty straightforward. In fact, I think based on these numbers, I should be able to get all this on a 120. So why don't we try that? Okay, so I picked my 120, one for all letters. Okay, so it did fit barely, 98%. Okay, so that's how that looks, all the letters. Now you can scale the data label, and oftentimes I find scaling it up is a good idea. You certainly want to be able to read this on the PDF so you can see and make sure that you know what driver there is. Okay, now if I had done one for all letters auto select, I would have got the same result. It would have auto selected the 120. Now I have another file here to go through the optimal by letter. And so again, this is we'll not break letters. We'll keep letters together as it loads. So let me go back to a 60. And that's not sure if that came out right, actually. All right. Well, maybe it did. That's not what I was expecting. I just did an undo there. 60 watt optimal by letter. That is strange. That's not what I was. Oh yeah. Sorry. Okay. I'll tell you what it was is because I put 20% as my custom margin. So I was expecting this to load differently. It's because I did 20%. So this is interesting in the sense that when you combine letters, you get within that 20% margin. So I'm gonna take that value out and delete these. And let me go ahead and give that another try. Okay, that's a little bit better. So so that's the custom margin at work. But the way that this comes out, the way that I was expecting it is we have 2 letters on the first driver up to 68%, 2 letters on the next driver, 82%. This one is just a single at 46%. This one is at 56%. So if you do the math here, it's going to be 4 drivers for these letters. So one of them will be a single letter, I suppose. And you can massage this. You can change. You can change that if you want, as far as what's loaded where, and I'll show you that here in a second. Bottom set 80%, and see how the colors help us to pretty easily see what's what goes where. But this is where I want to start talking about load balancing and how to sort of even this out. And we have a case here where I have just one letter, and maybe I want the R and the S to be together and the T and the E to be together. So so what I'll do is I'm going to ungroup these letters so that I can deal with each letter. And I select this letter, and then I hold the Alt key, and then I click on the data label of this driver, and it switches it and reloads it.
Jeff,
okay, so yeah.
We have a question about printing the layout. So the question I can see the different color wire runs on the screen, but when it prints, they're black. Is there a setting that would be causing that to not print the wire colors but show them on the screen?
Interesting. So these where's my mouse? These wires connecting each module are showing up black when you print. Yeah, I'd have to look into that. Obviously, the expectation is that that exports and that color is maintained, and I'd want to see if the driver itself is colored. But if that's not exporting and printing correctly, then that's something that we'd have to look into. I assume that would be exported to a PDF first, or would that be printing directly from the layout?
So the PDF export works, but not the direct print.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. All right. Yeah. Thanks for that. I will look into that. I think our expected workflow is creating the PDF and printing from that. Of course, you can print directly as well. So I'll have to look at that. Yeah. Thanks for that feedback. I'm not certain if that's a common error across in all cases, but we'll look into it. Yeah. That kind of defeats the purpose if you can't see that when you print. So clearly that's an issue. So okay, so that's how I load balanced, and I want to, and that was for the whole letter at one time. Now I'm going to go here into this letter into PowerFlow. And when I'm in PowerFlow, I then have the option to select, one run or another run. Okay, so instead of the whole letter, now I've just selected, just this part of this letter. And again, this is just for example. I wouldn't. There's no reason to do what I'm about to do. But if in a different case, if you wanted to break a letter, to load just an individual run. I don't have to select all the modules in the run, just have that run selected. I do shift click on the power supply. So I select this, I hold shift, and then I click here. And let me move this back. I have this collected, hold shift, click here. Okay, so shift click is to load an individual run. I'll do it here again. Okay, whereas alt click, I did an undo. So alt click is to do the entire letter. Okay, so in that case, I did alt click. And if you forget these little shortcuts, they're up here in the PS menu. Okay, so connect run, an individual run to a power supply, shift click on the PS. Connect current letter, the whole letter, alt click. Okay, I never use it from the menu because I have these shortcut keys memorized, but that's what those options are. Okay, so that's a little bit about load balancing. I'll put this back over here. So in this case, that's probably as probably as good as it's going to get. Okay, now let's see. I wanted to show what can we do? Optimal by run, I guess. So I'm going to delete these. And let's see on this letter if on these letters if optimal by run might get us down one power supply from what we're showing before. And in fact, it does. But look what we've done. So I've got I have 3 drivers now instead of 4. But now I've got the A is split up, and I have these letters that aren't next to each other. To me, this is more complex and more complicated than it's worth just to save one driver if it was me. But that's the idea with optimal by run, where this letter A has 3 distinct runs, and we could have connected it up here, in which case we'd have 2 different runs. But that's the concept of how a letter can be broken up by run. Okay. Now, of course, you can connect runs within letters so that you don't have multiple wires coming up to the driver, right? And that's fine to do. So for example, if I go in, ungroup this, if I go in back into PowerFlow on this H and I want to connect, I would select this module, hold Shift, connect this. Now see how that is now a dotted line. It is red because this is the red driver, but that line is now dotted. So this is how we would show wires being spliced within a letter. And in reality, this is what you'd probably do. So you'd show it like this or something similar. Okay, so now that I've done that, when I look up here, I've got only one wire coming out of that H. Now, again, this is probably to a level of detail that that a lot of people wouldn't care about. Some shops do care a lot about this, and they make their layouts exactly like how they want the guys to wire it up. So that's really I consider that to be a personal preference. So let me delete these, and I'll just show you the last of the auto options, which is optimal by modules. And again, what this will do is it's going to go ahead and load the first one up to 98%, 49 modules. And then it's going to load the second one also up to the maximum, 98, 49 modules. And then the last one is just kind of what's left. And I'm not sure why it sort of split where it did, but that's how it decided to do it. I'm not sure. I would have thought it would just be sort of left to right here, but that's the idea here is, look, I'm going to continue to load every module to 100%, and then the last one, just sort of gets what's left. So I'll do it on this one as well. This probably makes more, and this is a little bit more logical in how it divided it, but it broke it right here, and then we just have this little sliver of 8 modules on the last letter. I think this is probably more appropriate. If you think of a really big letter, and for example, that big letter is going to take 2 drivers or 3 drivers, maybe this approach makes more sense. We've had requests of this kind of approach because really this will give you, I think in every case, certainly the minimum number of drivers. And if later you go back and you decide that you want to optimize or change this or figure out how to do this more efficiently, then you can. But this would give you certainly the lowest module count because it's trying to load every driver to the maximum. Okay, so those are the options under here, and I'd like to now, I'll stay with this file. I'm going to delete these out, and let's go into PowerFlow, because when I normally when I manually load, I do it letter by letter, run by run, and I do it in PowerFlow. So let's say that I want to manually load this, and to do that, instead of automatically putting the drivers in, I have to select it, click on the plus icon, and then drag that driver in. Okay. Now I'm in PowerFlow, and I'm selected in the letter L here, and you can see because I see the preview modules and all that. So if I do Alt click, then it's going to load it. Okay, Alt click for the whole letter. Okay, I'm in the E, Alt click. I'm in the T, Alt click. Okay, I'm at 80%. And I say, you know what, that's great. 80%, first 3 letters, that's perfect. I would then go back here, bring in my next driver, ungroup this. Again, if you're doing a whole letter, you actually don't have to go into PowerFlow. You can just select the letter in the layout tool and do Alt click. Okay, and this one actually exactly to 100%. So that that worked out okay. But that's actually what the optimal by letter did, and that's where we ended up changing how we were doing it. So that's exactly where we ended up before. So I'll click this one. I'm going to shift this one over here. Okay. So, I think pretty straightforward for this particular set of letters, 3 drivers, somewhat balanced. So that's the manual approach. It's again, it's I think pretty straightforward, and that's I could have. Let me back up here. So I mentioned before that there's sort of fully auto, and then there's sort of somewhat auto, and somewhat auto in the sense means that you can select different objects, and then you can just do this the way that I was doing it. If I had laid this out from the get-go and wanted to select a loading option, then let me show you how to do that, because I realized that I didn't do that yet. But it's just a matter of pre-selecting. Let me try to get this out of here. Pre-selecting the power supply mode that you want to use. When you do the original population. So let me do this. I guess I can just select this whole thing. So I'm going to go ahead and go into PowerFlow. I've already got my path in there because I just cleared out the modules. But we're going to do I don't know, whatever, optimal by modules, 60 watt. And I'll go ahead and do populate all. So when you have multiple lines like this, I think probably I'll start. I think it'll go left to right across the top, and then do the bottom. Oh, you know what? I didn't. After all that, I didn't have the proper option selected, so I had to click Auto PS. Apologize to make this process work. So let me do that again. So the Auto PS button is how it automatically does it. Now I've really messed it up. Let me type that again. I apologize. Because I cleared and I still had the center paths in there, I think I messed it up. So let's go back into PowerFlow. Do the same thing that I was just doing, Auto PS. Do this one more time from scratch. But on most what I'd call simple or standard layouts, then this is the mode that I would do. I would just select whichever power supply mode that I wanted to use, and then I would pre-select it, and after it does this layout, it's just going to go ahead and load it. So for me, what I'm showing here really is the default. I did optimal by modules, but normally I'd probably do optimal by letters on something like this. Okay, so I might have done this as a different size. So I'm getting 4 drivers in here, and the first 3 should be loaded pretty much to 100%, and the last one's actually 92%. So in this case, it worked out pretty well. I don't have any letters broken there. I do have a letter broken there. So that's an option for selecting Auto PS and doing it all in one shot at the beginning. We're getting a little tight on time, so I want to show a couple of the things that, couple of the additional things that I was mentioning. We had talked about the idea of changing a driver, and let's say that I wanted to change to a 120. So I select the driver here, I go here, double click, do you want to change? Yes. Okay, notice that the size of the driver changed. So that's how to change. I also mentioned visually, as far as like consistency with how the labels work and how they're positioned. So for example, I can scale up the size of the label on one and click here on uniform size, and that will scale the rest of them to the same size. Oops. And yeah, I talked about using a guideline here. So, I like to have my drivers sort of consistent, right? Consistently positioned, consistently sized. It looks a lot cleaner really than sort of having them all over the place. So uniform size, it snaps and slides along the guideline. Some people will put modules on the top. I usually put them on the bottom, but you can really put them anywhere. I mentioned, obviously, we've been working in color mode, so we talked about options of, of turning on and off. So color mode, if you don't find it that valuable, it's not really adding to a layer, you can just turn it off, and we still, you can still see the wires to figure out what's loaded where. I also mentioned the ability to turn off the power supply wires, and that's just an option there. I would never do that in this case because now I have no idea what's going on. But if this was a smaller set, if there was a single driver, or if there was just two drivers, one on the first set, one on the first word, one on the second word, it would be easy. It would be obvious to know what goes where. So, and there's another. Let's see. This is a layout where I wanted to show real quick the idea of rotation of the power supply. So I'm going to go ahead and load this. This is going to be optimal by run. And this overloaded because this letter is actually just one big run. So what I wanted to do is break this here, and that's O for open. Okay, and let me bring in another one of these guys. This is what I had in the example. So I'm going to do shift click, load this one, and this one drops back. So if I wanted to position this, if this was self-contained and I wanted to position this driver, I'm going to do this in the layout tool, by the way. I don't do this in PowerFlow. If you're familiar with our products, you know that the bottom control point, usually for text or an object, is to rotate. So this is how I can rotate this driver around. Okay, we actually select it by the label. The rotate's a little bit weird the way it works because it rotates that. But and then the position of the text label is set here. Okay, so drawing left, drawing right. So that's how you can kind of play with this. So drawing left, and because we have so many shortcut keys and the software has a lot going on, we have a shortcut key which is Alt-Shift F11. And Alt-Shift F11, which rolls right off the tongue, is how you cycle through the positioning of the label relative to the power supply. Okay. So that's how we do it, and this is nice because the positioning, the angle, you want that to be precise when you're if you're putting something inside here. So Alt Shift F11, and that's probably fine. You have to kind of readjust it. Okay, so and this can be done in a cabinet. This can be done in anything where you want to put that driver inside. So I think that's most of what I wanted to cover. I think that is everything. If there are any questions, Lauren, let me just put the PowerPoint back up here. So upcoming next week, again, vectorizing, on-screen digitizing, freehand drawing. Here's my contact information, our contact information. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me afterwards. So that's 1 hour on power supply loading. I hope this is helpful for handling any job that you have. Sometimes power supply loading can be a complex process if it's a complicated job, but hopefully these tools will help you to be able to do that. So Lauren, are there any questions?
No questions from this side, so I think we are good to go.
Okay. So terrific. Thanks, everyone. Again, this is being recorded, so this will be available if you want to share it with your colleagues. And if you have any questions as you go through the software, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, and we'll talk to you next week. Thanks, everyone. Have a great week.
Thanks, y'all.